chairman of today's occasion, the secretary to the government of the Federation, with his able deputy, the Minister of Solid Minerals, Dele Alake, the Deputy Senate President, honorable ministers, governors, state governors, deputies, members of the National Assembly, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I subscribe to the established protocol. First and foremost, I would like to express my appreciation for the honor done to me by the Blueprint newspaper, appointing me the keynote speaker for this event. I would also like to congratulate and commend the Blueprint newspaper for the commendable job that they've been doing for almost 15 years now. I notice that the motto of the newspaper is truth and justice. And we know that truth and justice are very important fundamental principles. And I pray that Almighty God continue to enable you to subscribe to these principles and to be guided by them in the work that you do. I have been asked to speak on the topic, exploring the potentials of livestock exports in Nigeria. And I have decided to add a column and to say challenges and prospects. By way of introduction, I begin by observing that the livestock sector in Nigeria occupies a unique strategic position within the broader agricultural economy of our nation. As many of us may know, it contributes an estimated 7 to 10% of agricultural GDP and provides direct and indirect livelihoods to over 20 million Nigerians. This is not merely a subsector of agriculture. It is a fulcrum upon which rural livelihoods, nutrition security, and interregional trade dynamics revolve. To further illustrate, the Nigerian livestock industry has been valued at between 32 billion US dollars and 42 billion US dollars, or 50 billion, approximately 50 billion US naira, and 65 billion naira. Indeed, by 2025, by 2035, in 10 years' time, it has been estimated that this value could rise to between 74 billion naira to 96 billion naira on account of the efforts and the initiatives of the federal government and the investments that these are likely to attract into the sector. So it is undeniable. I think it's important to emphasize that that this sector is very important to Nigerian economy, and it has a vast latent potential for national sovereignty in food and nutrition security, and indeed for income generation, employment opportunities, as well as for export and remarkable contribution to Nigeria's GDP. We are here concerned with potentials for export, but it has to be emphasized the livestock sector is critical, a strategic critical sector, not for export, but especially for food security and nutrition security. I don't know how many of you have checked the statistics. Highest rates of stunting among our children. And just imagine what a glass of milk a day for lunch can do in terms of addressing this and changing this serious nutrition deficiency for our young men and women and their future. So the livestock sector, properly harnessed, has vast potential to address nutrition security, as well as, of course, open opportunities for income generation and expanding the scope of export. But to maximally tap this potential, we have to address the deep-seated structural inefficiencies and invest massively and appropriately to overcome them. Of course, these include antiquated production systems, fragmented value chains, weak animal health services, and suboptimal policy coordination among the tiers of government in the Nigerian Federation. Compounding these challenges also is the persistent scourge of violent farmer-herder conflicts, primarily driven by competition over increasingly scarce natural resources and exacerbated by climate change and poor land governance mechanisms. This violence in turn feeds into broader issues of national insecurity, displacement, and diminished social cohesion, making reform not only an economic necessity, but a peace-building initiative. Moreover, for so long, for far too long, the sector has suffered from chronic underinvestment, both in terms of public sector budgetary allocations and private capital infusion. This investment gap is evident in the glaring deficits in key infrastructure, ranging from ranches and grazing reserves to cold chains, animal feed mills, veterinary services, research institutes, laboratories, and livestock market systems. Besides, studies have shown that demographic shifts and evolving dietary preferences are set to place unprecedented pressure on Nigeria's livestock systems in the coming decades. Projections indicate that by 2050, Nigeria's population will reach nearly 400 million, positioning it as the third most populous nation globally. This demographic surge will necessitate a 250% increase in poultry meat, a 117% rise in beef, and a staggering 577% expansion in milk production to satisfy domestic consumption requirements. These figures are not hypothetical abstractions. They are alarm bells. Without deliberate anticipatory planning and long-term investments in livestock systems, Nigeria risks facing acute protein deficits, heightened food insecurity, and intensified pressure on already fragile rural livelihoods. Meeting this projected demand cannot be accomplished through the inertia of business as usual practices. Instead, it calls for a bold reimagining of the sector's architecture, anchored in sustainable intensification, climate-smart production, and inclusive value chain development. The alternative is an avoidable crisis in which growing populations, shrinking arable land, and deteriorating ecosystems combine to worsen both rural poverty and national food dependence. So we need to understand and appreciate this context in order to properly situate the reform initiatives launched a year ago by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. It is in this context that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's Livestock Reforms Initiative, with the support and assistance of the Presidential Livestock Reform Implementation Committee, represents a decisive policy shift, one that seeks to recalibrate Nigeria's livestock economy into a modern, climate-smart, conflict-resilient, and economically competitive industry. This initiative is not merely aspirational. It is designed to be implementation-focused, inclusive of key stakeholders, and responsive to Nigeria's unique ecological and socio-political diversity. The whole effort, in summary, as Mr. President said, is to turn tragedy into an opportunity. I want to say a few things about the current system before I go into the details of what the reform initiatives seek to address. To formulate effective and sustainable reform strategies for Nigeria's livestock sector, it is imperative to begin with a dispassionate, data-driven assessment of the current state of Nigeria's livestock sector. While the livestock economy is vast in scale and intricately woven into cultural and socio-economic tapestry of the nation, it remains encumbered by enduring structural weaknesses. These systemic inefficiencies have historically prevented the sector from transitioning into a fully modernized, commercial, viable, and climate-resilient pillar of Nigeria's agricultural development. The urgency for reform is therefore not only economic but strategic, intersecting the national security, food sovereignty, food nutrition sector, as well as, of course, required rural transformation. I will identify a few of these challenges, which I'm sure many people are aware of, and the Honorable Minister started talking about them. The production system. And the production system, of course, is a landscape of contrasts and challenges. The Honorable Minister gave the statistics about the livestock, the array of livestock numbers that we have. But I want to say that of the estimated population of 58 million heads of cattle, overwhelmingly, pastoral systems are 82%, with only 17% of production being agro-pastoral and only 1% attributed to commercial enterprises. The pastoralists operate under increasingly unpredictable climatic conditions, facing insecurity, limited access to veterinary care, and of course, all of these combine to create challenges in terms of livelihood and national stability. In the poultry sector, of course, there has been remarkable improvement. Approximately 21% of the output is now sourced from intensive production systems. However, it is very, very important to recognize that when we talk about livestock and the opportunities that are there, not just for food security, but for export, we are talking about a range of products. In Nigeria, unfortunately, because of the politicization and the identity politics, when you talk about livestock, almost automatically people think about cattle. And not just cattle, but the crisis that has bedeviled that sector relating to farmer-herder conflicts. But it is very, very important to recognize that virtually all the other categories of livestock that we have, from the cattle to the small ruminants, whether it is goat or is sheep, to pigs, to poultry and a range of other resources, there are extensive value chains that can be open to investment and that can go a long way in terms of developing the economy of our country. So improving production systems is very, very important. And improving production systems means that while modernization requires ranching, and we have to move in that direction, but we have to also factor into the planning and the preparations, what do you do with these producers that account for 82% of the current production? So what it requires is a strategy for progress and development that promotes ranching, but also simultaneously tries to address the challenges of the pastoralist, plus the crisis that bedevils that sector. So the recommendations that have been made by the committee and that is incorporated into the blueprint gives primacy in terms of ensuring that the private sector is a driver of the changes in this sector, but also the need to ensure that there is a strategy of resettling present large-scale producers by utilizing the areas of grazing reserves, which are available, many of which are gazetted in many states in our country. So the issue of farmer-herder conflicts needs to be addressed strategically, needs to be given attention, and of course, because of the traditional practices in this sector, we also need to pay a lot of attention to sensitization, to mobilization, to enlightenment, in order to create a conducive atmosphere for reforms. But most importantly, the third area that we need to pay attention to is how to improve the low productivity, which is characteristic of our indigenous breeds. And we can only do that by paying attention to animal health, to genetics, and to feeding systems. And a lot of recommendations have also been made in this regard. There are also infrastructure gaps, particularly bottlenecks in production, preservation, and processing. And a reform agenda has to address all of this for a holistic reformation of the Nigerian livestock sector. But in addition to this, there are also economic leakages that need to be addressed. Unsustainable import dependency and missed value chain opportunities. It's amazing that currently anywhere between 1.5 and 2 billion US dollars, if not more, are spent annually for importation of milk. And you can see what this has done to us in terms of dependence on importation, and also what can happen if we are to develop the dairy sector appropriately, in particular, as I said, because of the potential it has, not only to add to nutrition security generally, but in particular to address the challenges of stunting amongst our young men and women. So this area of progressive increase in production is very, very important, but it can only happen if we pay adequate attention to genetic improvements and to animal health and the associated programs. I will just mention that there is also the need in terms of what has been suggested. It has been suggested that, for example, what you can call low-hanging fruits, which is very, very important to address, emergency support and conflict resolution has to be paid attention to, and there were many recommendations along these lines. Emphasis also has to be made on private sector-led investment and modernization in order to unlock capital, markets, and innovation. And a lot of effort is already ongoing in terms of getting foreign investors that can bring good breeds and that can also help this in terms of improving our breeds. But it's also very, very important to pay attention to data and infrastructure development. And we need to build the backbone for evidence-based governance in these sectors. All these are contained in the recommendations in the blueprint, which Mr. President has tasked both the Ministry of Livestock Development and the other stakeholders, particularly partnership with state governments, to address these. The paper will be circulated, but the main point I've tried to make in this presentation is to recognize that definitely the livestock sector in Nigeria has vast opportunities. Even as it is, people who enter into the sector can make money. But our aim is not just to get people to get in to make money, as important as that is. But how can the development of the sector help in terms of ensuring that Nigeria can talk about food security, food sovereignty, and nutrition security? And paying attention to the livestock sector goes a long way in many fundamental respects to complement what is happening in the general agricultural sector and to also open up additional opportunities. This is a sector that has for long been neglected, that has for long been underinvested, and it is very, very important, therefore, to get all stakeholders to buy into the reform agenda of Mr. President, to work in collaboration as stakeholders and as partners, and to ensure that there is implementation that is sustainable, that within a period of 10 years, so that all the objectives defined for 2030 can be actualized. So I would like to say that given the enormous potentials associated with the livestock reforms initiatives launched by Mr. President barely a year ago, all hands need to be on deck to see to the actualization of this through stakeholder engagement, sensitization, mobilization, and public enlightenment. But most importantly, policy frameworks, a conducive environment for private sector investment need to be adequately provided. Legal frameworks also need to be created because that's the only way to have enduring and sustainable development process, not just in the livestock sector, but of course in all sectors. So I want to stop here. Thank you so very much. Thank you.